I think we should be ready. I think we should be ready to go. I think everything is online in three, two, one, and let's go. Okay, hi guys, it's Cassim. Welcome back again to another episode of the Man to Man podcast. As usual, really want to thank you so much for watching. Really want to thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us. I really appreciate it. I'll remind you that many of you, in case you've forgotten and you've never actually seen one of these episodes, I'll remind you that without you realizing it, you by you watching me and by you listening to me, you are actually helping me achieve a personal dream of mine that I had. About 6.5 years ago, I set myself a goal, and one of my goals was to help men become higher, fuller expressions of themselves. I wanted to help men basically become all that they were capable of becoming and become successful in life and live incredible lives. And believe it or not, that dream has actually become a reality. So believe it or not, as you watch me, you are and as I do this, you are actually activating something, a concept which I found to be really interesting. Which is around this thing of it is possible for you to get what you want and for me to get what I want as well. And so I really do thank you so much for watching, and I really do thank you so much for supporting me. I do appreciate it. By the way, if you like what I share, if you like the stuff that I talk about and it's useful to you, jump on my YouTube channel, Cassimotive, subscribe. That's where I put most of my stuff. So let's get into today's episode. You've probably seen what I've titled today. I've entitled today, when you are in a rush, you tend to ask for help. And I'm going to get into that in a bit, but let me tell you what I want to talk to you about today, because as a man to man and as brothers here, I really want to talk to you about realistically three things today, if I have enough time, that I think are really important for us lads to talk about and for us to discuss. I want to firstly talk to you about people can know you and what's is right for them, but they may not necessarily know what is right for you and what is true for you. And essentially, what I want to talk to you on that subject is about making your own decisions, being a man and committing to something, even though it may not work out. The second thing that I want to talk to you about is I want to talk to you about what I've entitled today's show, which is really about getting help, really about asking for advice from other people, really about analysing the world around you, and coming up with your own conclusion about what the best direction is to take. And the third thing that hopefully I'm going to get time to talk to you about is I want to talk to you about this phrase that I've heard so much and I've read so much in successful people's books. The phrase is, it was a very humbling experience. So those are the three things that I want to talk about. I'm going to go off on different tangents depending on what I'm going to talk about today, and that's why I say that I may not get to talk about all these things. I wanted, when I started this show and this podcast, I wanted to have the freedom to be able to talk to you as if we were literally having a conversation, right? And a conversation isn't like when you're watching TV and everything flows. You jump back and forth with various things, and that's what I wanted to have the freedom to be able to do. So let us get into today's. By the way, I hope you're okay. I hope you're having a good week. Where are we? We've just left the bank holiday. We're now in September. And I know that this year has probably been shit for you. I know it hasn't been ideal. But look, we all both know that every down must have an up at some point. Even though things may be really shit for you at the moment and all your plans have been thrown out into the air, look, I just want to remind you that things ultimately do get better. Things ultimately do improve. We know from the last 2,000 years of recorded history that history essentially reads like this. History reads devastation, hope, ups and downs, right? And that is essentially how the world has gone for the last 2,000 years of recorded history. We know that there's always a down and then there's an up. There's some kind of war and then there is peace. There's peace and then there's war. That's essentially how the world for the last 2,000 years of recorded history has gone. So this shouldn't really be a surprise. We've had, most of you who are listening to me today, you've actually had a pretty decent sort of 3-4 years recently. You had the opportunity to go on holiday, you've been able to hang out with your friends, you've been able to make loads of money in your work, you've been able to eat what you want, you've been able to go to festivals. You've had a pretty good sort of 2-3 years recently. So we should know that ultimately whenever there is an up, at some point there has to be a down, right? It is one of the principles of the universe, right? It's a law. And in fact, actually, before we get into what I want to talk to you about today, let me talk a little bit about that. One of the things that I share with you lads particularly, and I share with men, is there are these what I call 5 spheres. The world, when I started looking at the world, I began to realize that the world seemed to operate on what I call these 5 spheres. And what I basically realized is, if you do not understand that the world operates on these 5 spheres, your world is going to be very, very, very difficult. And what I began to notice, because basically one of the questions that I'd always wondered was, why is it that there are so many good human beings, so many guys who are really good guys, they do everything right, they're humble and everything, but yet they never win at life, yet they never achieve anything at life? Have you ever wondered that question? Because I did. I was like, I don't understand. I thought to be successful, to be a winner at life, you had to be a good person and work hard. I thought that was kind of it. But basically, I discovered that there were people who were good people and worked hard, but they got to the end of their life and they had nothing. They'd not achieved anything, right? So I started to wonder what's going on. And one of the things that I began to realize was that these individuals hadn't worked out how the world worked. And what I basically, and the metaphor that I want to use about this is, and again, we're just talking man to man here, and I want you to understand this because it's really important. I wish somebody had told me this, right? Most of you have to understand, I've literally been reading like 3 books every single week for the last like 6 years to be able to come to the conclusion that I'm about to give you. Right? So most of you are never going to read that many books. You're never going to interview that many people. You're never going to study life to that degree. So I am essentially saving you so much time by sharing this with you. Basically, what I began to realize is that a lot of these individuals were good, but they didn't understand how the world worked. For example, if you've never played football before, and you go and play football, and I just put you into a football game, the chances of you winning at that football game, if you know nothing about the rules, if you know nothing about the laws, if you don't understand how throw-ins, how free kicks, how penalties work, the chances of you winning at that game are very small. Now, you must understand, that doesn't mean that you're not a good person. That doesn't mean you will not work hard and chase that ball around that entire field. Right? You're doing everything you're supposed to be doing. You're working hard. You're a good person. But the chances of you winning in that football game is very, very, very limited because you don't understand how it works. And essentially, that's what I found. I found that as I studied people who were good people, but who never succeeded at life, one of the things that I began to notice is that these individuals didn't learn how the world worked. They knew how their world worked a little bit, but they never knew how the entire world operated. So basically what I found was that there are these 5 spheres that the entire world seems to operate on. One of those is laws and principles. Everything in the entire world operates on laws, right? Either you go into football, in football there are certain laws that you cannot break, right? We know it. Right? When you are, for example, making a football, to make a football operates on certain laws. It operates on certain principles, right? To score a goal or to do a free kick in football operates on certain principles. You have to do certain things in a certain order if you want to be successful, if you want to achieve those results. The easiest law that I tell people, because all of you can understand this, is I talk about the law of gravity, right? The thing about laws, and this is what I keep telling people, is laws do not discriminate. I am telling you, I don't care whether you're a man, you're female, you're white, you're black, you like heavy metal, you like R&B, you're gay, you're straight, you're bisexual, you're into going to festivals, you're into going to D&B nights, you're into skiing. It doesn't matter. I'm telling you, if you go on top of a building and you jump off that building, no matter who you are, no matter where in the world you are, you will never go up. That right there is what's called a law, right? Now, if you don't understand that, now most of us obviously are going to say, well, Cassim, you're a fucking idiot. Of course, that's a bit obvious. I know that sounds obvious. And the only reason why it sounds obvious is because you can see the effect instantly, right? You've been told by everybody. I'm telling you, if you go on top of a building and you jump off it, you will very quickly understand why that is a law, right? Here's the issue. The entire world has all these different laws, but many of them, the effects or the result of those laws don't happen instantly. They don't happen straight away. For example, there is a law of the universe called the law of cause and effect. The law of the cause and effect basically says, to give you an example, is if you take a sweet corn and you put it into the ground and you water it and you give it sunshine, that right there, you've just activated a law, right? If you put it there and you water it, at some point it will grow. Now, most people will say, well, Cassim, I get that is kind of a rule. Because the reason why this is a law is because there is no way that if you plant that sweet corn and you put it in the ground and you water it and you give it sunshine, there is no way it will not grow. It will grow. We all know that, right? Now, many of us will say, well, Cassim, well, what if the wind comes? Well, what if something eats it? I get all that, right? I get absolutely all of that. But I'm saying we all know if you put the seed in the ground and you water it, it will grow, right? And so going on to this point, and what I wanted to talk to you is you have to understand that the world seems to operate on these 5 spheres. Basically, the 5 spheres are, in fact, I'm not going to even get into that because it's too complex and too deep for me to get into it with you, because I really want to talk to you about these 3 things today. But my point being is, I think it's really important for you to understand how the world works. You need to know how the world works. For example, in fact, let me touch on this because this is so important. For example, one of those other spheres is rules. So most people confuse laws with rules. Did you know that? A lot of people think that a rule is also a law. A rule can be broken. Oh, this is good. Did you know that? Did you know that a rule can be broken? A rule can be broken, but a law can't be broken. In fact, it can be broken, but it will break you if you try to break it. So, for example, a lot of people in trying to win at life, they're good people, they work hard, but here's what they do. They don't break the rules. Because a rule is an agreement that's been agreed upon by either 2 people or multiple of different people. So, for example, a lot of people don't understand that whilst laws never change, rules do. So, for example, the rule going back 40 years ago was in order to succeed at life, you really needed to get a degree. If you go back 40 years ago and you ask somebody, if a man wanted to have a good life and be successful in life, what would be some of the essential things? A rule 40 years ago I almost guarantee you, somebody will tell you, you need to go to university, you need to be well educated. Right? Today, that is no longer the same. The rule today is no longer like that. It is actually possible for you to be successful without having a degree. Do you understand what I'm saying? This stuff is so deep that most of you I don't even have time to get into it. But let me not go on off on a tangent. please let me come back to what I really wanted to talk to you about today, because what I want to talk to you about is really important. Okay, right. Let me firstly start off by talking to you about this first point. So the first point that I wrote down is that people can know for them, but no one can know for you. Right, let me give you a bit of background to this point. When I first started studying successful people, I very quickly discovered some what I call principles, right? Some basically common denominators. When I first, like, if you study anything at first, you will very quickly learn, no matter what it is, breastfeeding, football, electrician, whatever it is that you study, very quickly you'll begin to realize that there are certain patterns, that there are certain laws, that there are certain common denominators that link all the various different people who do that thing. And one of the things that I began to realize very quickly as I started studying successful people is that many of the successful people who had achieved success all went through some kind of trauma. They all went through some kind of difficulty, some kind of extreme circumstances when they were younger. Whether that be poverty, whether they were abandoned, whether they went through foster care, whether they were involved in the criminal justice world where they were stealing, robbing, whatever. Essentially, almost everybody that I find who is successful, who has a charity, who has a foundation, who is at the top of their different arenas, I can almost guarantee you that if we follow back and trace their childhood in one way or another before kind of age 25, they went through some extreme circumstances in their life. And this led me to studying basically people who had gone through different extreme circumstances. And this led me to studying cystic fibrosis. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with cystic fibrosis, but if you don't know what it is, Google it. When I studied cystic fibrosis, I found something that was absolutely fascinating, because I'd never really ever, I'd known what I'm going to talk to you about in a second, but I'd never really seen it in this way. So, I watched this girl, and I can't even remember her name, but she was so life-changing for me. And there's this documentary which basically follows this girl in the last year of her life. And it was absolutely fascinating because the documentary is in her hospital. And she's talking, and there is this scene where the doctor comes in, and the doctor is assessing her, and then she starts telling the doctor about all her medication, about she can't be on this and she can't be on that, and that won't work, and this is not the right dosage. And essentially what this made me realize was this: that she knew more about herself than the person who was supposed to be an expert. And even though the expert had information that he'd learned from previous experience, that did not necessarily fit for who she was and what she was doing. Stay with me, I'm going to get to a point here. So then, one of the other things that many of you will know I had to do is I had to study unsuccessful people. Because if you really want to understand an area, you have to study both polar opposites. If you want to understand what good is, you need to know what bad is. If you want to understand what enlightenment is, you need to understand what non-enlightenment is. If you want to understand what consciousness is, you need to understand what unconsciousness is. So in that quest, in order for me to understand how somebody becomes successful in life, starting off with nothing, I had to go and study people who were unsuccessful, in my opinion, right? And the way that I define people who are unsuccessful, so the way that I define success is like this. I define success as deliberately choosing the future that you want and the person who you want to become, and slowly by slowly making your way towards that. That's how I define success. In other words, I believe that if you are not successful in life, it's because you have not firstly deliberately chosen the life that you want, and you're not making progress in that direction. So I started studying people who basically I define to be unsuccessful. And I began to listen to what they were saying about why it is that they weren't successful. And I began to realize they all kept saying something which I found fascinating. They would say things like, well, I got given the wrong advice. That's why I'm stuck in this job. Well, the reason why I'm on methadone or the reason why I'm addicted to drugs is because I went to the hospital and they gave me the wrong treatment, and then all of a sudden I got hooked on drugs, and now look at me, I'm a methadone addict, or I'm a cocaine addict. Basically, what I found with unsuccessful people is that they were given advice, and instead of making a decision on whether the advice works for them, they simply believed the person as an absolute, that basically based, how do I put this? I don't know whether I'm putting this across the right way, but I'm trying to get to it, so stay with me. So they would accept. So, for example, if I came up to you when I gave you a piece of advice, you came up to me and you said, Cassim, look, something bad is happening in my relationship. We're constantly arguing. You seem to be, let me put it another way, which is more relevant. You came to me, you said, Cassim, look, I'm unsuccessful at the moment. I want to be successful. What should I be doing? Here's what the unsuccessful people would do. Unsuccessful people would listen to the advice that I took given them, and they will take it that is absolutely what they have to do. Now let me tell you what successful people do. Successful people will listen to the advice that I tell them. They will then go do their own research. They will study multiple people, and then they will make a decision based on who they are and what they know to be truthful for them, and then they will make that decision from that. Here's the point that I want to get to you, and really is what I thought was really important, and as to man is what I want to talk to you about. So I believe that you as a man have to get to the point in your life where you make decisions based on who you are. Stop listening to the advice that other people tell you and take it to be absolute. Many of you have no idea how many people I speak to, and I ask them, why are you doing the job that you're doing at the moment? And they say to me, I'm doing the job that I'm doing at the moment because this is the path that my parents told me would allow me to become successful. And I said, well, did you speak to anyone else to get advice? And they said, well, no, of course not. Well, why would I listen to anybody else? My dad told me. I've discovered that sincerity is not a test of truth, guys. Just because somebody is a good person and somebody wants to do the best for you, it doesn't mean that it's right for you. Some of you who are listening to me, you have people in your family who've told you, you've had deep down this inclination that you've wanted to start a business, or that you've wanted to go into writing, or that you wanted to become a coach. Not a single member of your family has ever become a coach. They've never owned their own business. They've never done any designing. They've never ran a team. And so they've told you, because of that, there is no way you can do it. I mean, it's impossible. And you've just taken them as an absolute and just thought, well, clearly they must be right. I mean, they love me. They're sincere. And what I want to talk to you as a man to man is, it's so important that as a man, you begin to make your own decisions based on your own ability. Guys, I cannot tell you how many autobiographies, because you guys know I read an autobiography every week. I cannot tell you the amount of autobiographies that I have read of people who've started with nothing and have achieved success, where I hear these words. I was told that it was impossible. I was told that it would never work. I was told that I wasn't going to make it. I cannot tell you the amount of times I read that phrase in autobiographies. It's almost a joke, right? But the person deep down knew that but I've got what it takes. But I know I can do this. I know I may not have all the equipment and the knowledge and the skills and the team, but I really believe in this. But I really want to do this. I know that I may not be rich. I know that I may not be successful, but I really want to work with animals. But I really want to work with dogs. But I really want to coach people, but I really want to write children's books, but I really want a restaurant down in Cornwall. Every successful person that I have studied, there is a word that they use, which I don't like to use because I don't like to explain it to people because I find it so difficult, which is that word instinct. They use that phrase. They say, my gut was telling me that was the right path. Deep down, I always knew that was where I was supposed to go. There was just this gut feeling about the idea that I followed. I thought that it would work out. And what I want to say to you is, as a man, this is so important because not only as a man is one of your roles to lead your family. In order to lead your family, you have to be able to be bold in your decision making. You have to be able to be bold and say, do you know what, babes, I know at the moment I'm going to be quitting this job at the moment, which is paying me 65 grand a year. But listen to me, if I can start this organization, if I can start this company, I know we're going to take a hit on the money. I know we're not going to be able to go on this many holidays, but if I can just give up this for the next 3 years, babes, give me 5 years to see if I can make this happen. And if I can't make this happen in 5 years, then I will go back and I will do that thing. And you know I've been good at it anyway, so that job will always be there and I can go back and I can still be in the same position. And you have to be able to say that, and you have to be able to believe in your ability to figure things out. You have to get to the point where you can say, do you know what, Cass? I know that if I take this chance, it may not work out, but I'll make it work out. But I will do whatever I have to do to make this a success. And I want to really encourage you to get to the point in your life where you have that much conviction in yourself. Many of you know that on Sundays I do a seminar, and one of the things that I say, a goal setting seminar, and one of the things that I talk about in that seminar is I give the statement that it's important to believe in God, to believe in the universe, to believe in other people. But one of the things that's really important is that there has to be a bigger part of you that believes in you more than other people believe in you. I shared with you guys on many occasions that the first video I ever did was a message of you cannot expect other people to support your dreams. And the reason why I'm so passionate, and I actually wanted to talk to you about this particular subject, is I cannot tell you the amount of you lads who are literally, you have such a good idea. You literally have so much to give the world. But yet, people have talked to you out of doing it. You wanna you wanna go and buy a farm, and that is a lifestyle you wanna live. But people have told you, well, that's ridiculous. How are you ever going to make money from having a farm? Farms have run out. But you know that you could make it. You know deep down that you can make money from it. You know that you can have an incredible lifestyle. And I'm just wondering whether you have that much conviction within yourself, and you've got to the point in your life now where you can take advice, you can listen to what people say, but ultimately you have you're basing most of the information not based on what has been done, not based on what other people tell you is possible, but deep down what you know to be true about you. I can't tell you guys the amount of people, right, where I've read their story and all the odds were against them. Everybody told them that they were not going to come through this cancer. Everybody told them that they should give up on having children. They can't have children. They've tried to have children and they can't. And all the evidence says they can't. Their doctor is told them they can't. Their parents have told them that they should just give up because it's costing them a fortune. But yeah, Deep down, they knew they were destined for that. They knew that this was their path. They knew they were supposed to be a mother. And they kept going, and voila, as if by miracle, as if by magic, they get pregnant. And I'm just saying to you, to really, really, as a man, we're just talking man to man here. I really want to encourage you to begin to shut some of the outside world out and really listen to yourself. Really just silent. I think one book calls it go in your cave. Go in a cave and shut out the noise and then make the decision. Listen, you've got to obviously, clearly, like, look, if you're speaking to experts and they genuinely know what they're talking about and you deep down know that what they're saying is right, then clearly take that advice. But what I think so many people we do, particularly us men, is we want other people to be in the driver's seat of our life so that it alleviates us from taking accountability. Right? And this is why I say, when I studied unsuccessful people, this was a pattern amongst them. Successful people basically were given advice. Unsuccessful people were basically given advice and they took it as absolute. They basically put the doctor or their boss or their parents in the driver's seat and they believed them absolute. And what ultimately ended up happening was that when it failed, because it wasn't their conviction anyway, they didn't really want to do it. They didn't really believe in it, right? Because we all know that. When you don't really believe in something, when something goes wrong, guess what you're going to say? Well, I knew this wasn't going to work anyway. I knew this was going to be a fail. But when you know it's yours and and you have to make it, you will do anything. You will do whatever is required. You will bend backwards. You will go and learn stuff because you know that it is you. You know that deep down you've got the ability to do it, right? And this was a pattern of unsuccessful people that I found where they would just say things like, well, if it wasn't for my... Look, I'm 40 now and I don't even have any savings and I'm unhappy and I've just got divorced because, you know what? My mum shouldn't have told me to go down this path. You guys are listening to me and you think that it's a joke when I tell you that. You would be shocked at the amount of people who I hear. Many of you know I'm training to be a counsellor, right? And I have to read all these things about questions about what people ask. And you would be shocked. And I, obviously being Cassim, I'm one of them people where people tell me stuff all the time anyway. And you guys would be shocked at the amount of people who blame other people for the way their life was worked out. They blame their boss for not earning enough money. Can you believe that? We live in the UK and people genuinely say the reason why I am not earning 50k a year is because my boss won't give me the pay rise. Well, move job then. Go to another company. You see, but then if you say, well, if you say that, then that means that the person then, the reason why they haven't got the pay job, the pay rise, or the amount that they want to earn is because of them. It's because they refuse to move. Do you see what I mean? So many people lived in denial. We don't want to sit in the driver's seat of our life. We want other people. So what I would share with you is, if you really truly want to become successful and you truly want to live an incredible kind of life, and we're talking man to man here, my advice to you, and you don't have to follow my advice. As I say, be a student, not a follower, right? Don't be a sheep, be a lion. Is really start making your own decisions. Start looking down inside of you at what feels most right for you and then make your own decisions. There are so many people who got told by their parents that they would never become successful if they did not go to university. And yet now they're successful. There are so many people who got told, if you marry that person, you're never going to be happy. It's never going to work out. And yet those people are together 40 years later. I've heard so many stories. Many of you know I get to sit in front of people and interview them. I interview people who've been married for 15 years or more. And you would be shocked at the amount of people where I sit in front of them or beside them And I asked him about the challenges that they had when they first started the relationship. And you would be shocked at the amount of people who say something on the lines of, well, Cassim, my parents didn't really agree with the marriage when we first began dating. Or my mum didn't even like him, or my mum didn't even like her at the start of our marriage, right? And etc. etc. You would be shocked at the amount of people who say this, but then the person will be like, but I knew, I loved him, I loved her, we knew we were right for each other. And now they've been together 40, 50 years. It is absolutely unbelievable. But it really does start with really sitting there and listening to yourself. And I want to warn you that if you do that, you're asking for trouble. That's why a lot of people don't want to do this. Because a lot of people, what they want to do is that they want to tiptoe their way through life. They don't want to hurt anyone. They don't want to be upset. They don't want to be seen as the bad guy. Right? So they're good, but they have nothing that they want. They're a great human being. They'll open the door for you, but no one ever opens the door for them. They will give you advice and they will be there for you, but the moment that it comes to time for them to ask for help or somebody to help them, nobody's there. This is what I'm saying. So that's the first thing that I wanted to share with you. I don't know whether it's helped you or not, or I've kind of articulated the point in the right way, but I just thought it's really important as a man, if you're going to be a leader and you're going to be leading your family and you're going to be really wanting to become all that you're capable of becoming, I just think it's really important for you to start making your own decisions, right? Take the advice of other people, but ultimately have the final say in your life. Right? You want to think of your life a bit like a CEO. A CEO has a board of directors and they have to listen to what the board says, right? Because the board of directors are all successful in their different arenas. You have the marketing director, right? You may have the sales VP come to you and say to the CEO in your board meeting that, look, we've got to spend more money on salespeople. But actually, you as a CEO understand that you need to pump more money into marketing because there is a new product that is coming to be launched. And you have to be able to discern and make a decision that may upset the sales organization or the sales department, but actually overall, in the great scheme of things, will actually benefit. Let me take this deeper actually, because this point is so important, man. Some of you who are listening to me, you have been given advice that you should... Actually, do you know what? I'm going to talk about this in the next point. Because this first point is in part linked to the second point that I want to talk to you about. So I hope that the first part has helped you out. Let me now get into the second part that I wanted to share with you. The second thing that I want to talk to you about as a man to man is this. When you're in a rush, you tend to ask for help. So, I don't know how many of you have noticed this, but have you ever noticed that whenever you're like rushing to get to a wedding because, you've been at the hotel and the wedding is starting at 11 o'clock and you were late or you got stuck in traffic, whenever you're running late, you will always ask for advice. You will always ask for directions. How do we get to the hotel? Right? But when you arrive in your own time, you will find the parking yourself and you will then walk to reception and you'll try to figure out what the grounds are like. Have you ever noticed that? Or have you ever noticed when you want to go to a football game and you're on a football game and you want to get there and you want to get to the stadium, you ask people, oh, by the way, do you know how to get to the stadium? Because you're in a rush, you need to get there. Have you ever noticed that when you're in a shop and you're just in there and you need to find something quickly because you've seen the parking ticket matey and you need to jump in there, get the food, and get straight back into the car before you get a ticket? Have you ever noticed that you will go and ask people for advice? Here's what I've come to realize. Most people do not ask for advice unless they're in a rush. My God, this is so good. I'm helping you brothers out here so much today. Okay, so what I've come to realize us men we do is us men, and in fact the human race as general, men and women, we have a propensity to not ask for advice and to not look at all the various options until things have got really, 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 really bad. Let me tell you why I was thinking about this. I was thinking about this because I was journaling and I wrote down a statement. I cannot remember the exact statement that I wrote down, but it was something on the lines of most people are blasé for are like laissez-faire. They're very relaxed for the first 50 years of their life. Oh, I remember why I was writing this down. So in my book, so I'm writing a book at the moment, and in the book I was telling this story about. In fact, let me tell you the story because it's quite an interesting story. So I went to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. Many of you know that, right? So I went to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. I think it was like 4 years ago. And when you arrive to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, they have to take your blood. They have to see what percentage of oxygen you have in your blood. And the reason is that basically the higher up you climb a mountain, or in this particular case, Mount Kilimanjaro, the higher up you climb Mount Kilimanjaro, if you have any conditions or, I don't know, you suffer with some kind of illness or something like that, the chances of you getting ill become more and more and more increased the further up you go Mount Kilimanjaro or the mountain, whatever mountain it is. Okay? So one of the things that they have to do is they have to check your blood whilst you're down at sea level. Obviously, it's not sea level. You understand what I mean, like at ground level, before you even get anywhere near the actual mountain itself. And I think it's something like your blood and air has to be like 85% or something like that. And if it isn't, then you cannot go. You basically cannot climb that mountain. Reason being is that if you're already having problems there at the mountain and your oxygen levels are not very good at the bottom of the mountain, can you imagine the chances of getting higher and higher and higher? You're just not going to make it. And obviously, one of the things that you have to remember is when you own a company which takes people up mountains, when people are choosing who to go with, they choose based on the people's success rate. I think you understand what I mean by that, right? So if you were going to climb, let's say, Everest, which I know is crazy. I know, let's just metaphorically speaking, I know you'd never do it, but in case you ever thought, oh, let me climb Mount Everest, you would want to climb with the company that has the most success rate of getting people to Everest without killing them, right? That's what you'd want to go with. So to avoid having a really bad success rate, this is part of the reason why they check your blood, because they would much rather give up £3,000 of you trying to climb Mount Kilimanjaro than you try to climb it and they get a really bad review. And also the other thing that you have to remember is, if you take someone up the mountain and something goes wrong, somebody has to bring them back down the mountain, which means that there are less people to help as you continue up the mountain. Do you see what I mean? It's just more effort. Everything is just more effort. Anyway, point being is, there were these two American guys who were who were supposed to be climbing with us. Unfortunately, these guys were like in their late 60s, probably maybe 65, 66, something like that. And they checked that on the night that we arrived, because we arrived the night before we were actually going to start going to the mountain. So the night we arrived, they checked their blood and air, and it was already high. Then they thought, right, okay, we'll check it throughout the night, and they checking it throughout the night. Then the next day in the morning, they checked these two guys' blood and air, and again they weren't good. So they basically said to these guys, look, we know you've already paid your money, but we're gonna happily refund it for you. Sorry, but we can't allow you to go up the mountain. And so me and the guys, we were sat there, they were a bit down, and we were having a conversation. And obviously they already knew why I was climbing Mount Everest, because the reason why I was climbing Mount Everest in the first place was because I have what's called I call a life's list. I have a list of goals that I want to achieve before I die. And climbing Mount Kilimanjaro was on that list. And so they knew this. And we were having a conversation, and they were saying to me, look, Cassim, do you know what? We obviously know you're going to speak to people in the future and you're going to coach people. This would be one of the pieces of advice I would give you. And the other guy echoed this same principle, which is that they said, look, don't leave everything until the last part of your life, because that's what they did. They were scientists, right? They actually used to work for NASA. I remember it because obviously that's quite a weird, a unique kind of place to work. And they were saying, we've spent our lives working to retire, but unfortunately, obviously, as you can tell, we've left everything until the last minute. Because what they said to me is, we've retired and now they were like, they'd gone to like Hawaii and visited all these places. And so what they shared with me was, don't leave everything until the last minute. Here's what I'm saying. Many people who are listening to me, some of you guys, you don't realize the amount of people who leave their life, who leave their happiness, who leave their joy, who leave their healing until the last bit of their life, and then they have to rush to basically finish it. They have to rush to basically do everything at the last minute, right? And it's so it's so coincidental that at the last bit of isn't it interesting that usually when you meet people who are a lot more calmer, who are a lot more open, who are a lot more humble, they tend to be older. Why? It's no coincidence, because when you get to that kind of age, you have to listen more, because the time that you have is so short on the planet that you don't know. You could be here maybe. Let me take this further. What many of you don't realize, and it's something that I actually had to learn, is how fragile life is becomes more and more apparent the older you get, because something happens that most of you are not expecting. People start dying, right? Many of you don't realize that if you are the oldest person with the people in the group of the people who you grew up with, that means you've watched all your friends die. It's actually quite horrible and quite depressing, me even thinking about it. But I've spoken to so many people who are like, Cassim, I don't have any friends anymore. All my friends have died, right? They all died in their 50s and 40s, and one died of a heart attack, and another one died of lung cancer, and another one just natural causes, just one day died. And a lot of people don't realize this. And so life becomes more and more fragile and more clear the older you get, because just when you're young, you hardly see death. You're not exposed to death. In fact, is one of the when I went to many of you know I went to run the length of Northern Ireland, and I was going to run most of the UK, all of the UK, sorry, but I had to stop. So I ran Ireland, Northern Ireland, Scotland, but I had to stop in St Augustus because obviously coronavirus happened. And when I was up in Scotland, I stayed with a woman who lived on a farm with 6 of her children. And when I was staying in her B&B, and when I was speaking to her in the evening, we were having food because she cooked me a meal, because basically they lived in the middle of nowhere. Right, this is right at the top of Scotland near John O'Groat. So there's literally no restaurants, nothing. Like you can drive for like 50 miles and you won't see a single shop. So she had to cook food for me, and we were talking at dinner, and she was saying to me, basically, I was like, "Why do you have so many children?" Right? Because in England, or in the UK, having like 6 children is quite dramatic, in my opinion, of course. And she was like, well, the reason why is because when you live on a farm, accidents happen. And I said, what do you mean by that? She said, well, look, we live on a big farm. All our children work on the farm. And, when you work on a farm, accidents can happen. People can, whatever, have an accident and pass away. And so when you live where we are, the children can pass away, and that's why we've had to have several children, not out of, well, she was like, I actually like children anyway, but she was like, a lot of people here, they've had their children pass away due to accidents or whatever. And I thought, and one of the things that, and anyway, we carried on talking about this, and she goes to me, she goes, you have to understand that, when you live down, down with a, she was so funny, but she was like with normal people, right? When you live down south with normal people, a lot of them are not exposed to death. Because the way she was talking about death was as if death was some kind of like normal thing. But a lot of people, basically, what we ended up just like talking about is today, most of us who live in the UK, we're not really exposed to death. Death is like some kind of other thing that we don't really talk about. In fact, in my book, I spend almost a second half of that entire book talking about death. Because, one of the things that I've come to realize in life is until you basically realize that you're going to die and you get it, like, I'm not just talking hypothetically, when you get that at some point your life will be over, you basically will allow everybody to just treat you like shit. What do I say? One of the things that I talk about in that book is I say, when you when you undervalue your time, you overestimate other people's time. So in other words, when you think that your time is long and you've got forever, what will ultimately end up happening is that you will just wishy-washy and you will go on other people's holiday and you follow their dreams and you do whatever they want. But when you realize, holy crap, I could die soon. I could die tomorrow. You're so careful about who you allow in your life, how you allow people to treat you. So many people will end up in a relationship and they're unhappy, and I say to them, if you were going to die tomorrow, what would you do? And they're like, well, I'll definitely break up with her. And I'm like, what? And you think, why don't you do that now? Because in their head, they still think, yeah, but, it's not so bad now, and I have forever to live, and like it's like 100 years. You see what I'm saying? And so one of the things that I think is so important that we all need to come to realize is you've really got to get to the point where you start asking for advice sooner. Advice on what should I be like. How do I make my marriage better? Not look for advice when you're getting divorced. Not when your other half gives you the divorce papers, now you start reading books on marriages. So many of you who are listening to me, you know that your mental health is not good. You know it. But you won't look for the help. You won't go and speak to a profession until it gets to the point where you're almost suicidal. Right? Some of you who are listening to me, you know that your vitality is not good. You don't eat right. You don't exercise, right? You don't live in a body that you love. And the reality of life, this is what I found anyway to be true for the people I've studied in my own life, is you're probably not going to do anything about it until it gets to the point where it's so bad that you're forced to. I've shared with you guys on many occasions that I've basically found that we change because of two things. The first reason why people change is because something bad happens. Devastation. They're basically put in a position where they have no choice but to change. Usually they're smoking, they know that smoking is bad for them, but they're now being told that they have lung cancer. Right? Somebody knows that their relationship is not good, it's not been good for a long time, but they've decided they don't want to go to counselling, they've decided they don't want to go to a marriage counsellor, they don't want to talk about it, and now their partners come and said that they've spoken to their lawyer and they've got the divorce papers. Oh, now let's go through counselling. Somebody hates their job and they hate their job and they're still in their job and they hate it and they complain and most of the time they don't put in effort. One day they get told, unfortunately, we have to close the department and you're one of the people we have to let go. So instead of the company restructuring itself to ensure that that person stays there, They let that person go because that person isn't of value to the company. And now they're like, do you know what? I'm actually going to follow what I want. That's the first way. The second reason is inspiration. You basically have a future which is more exciting and more compelling than where you are or where you've been. And that is done by choice because you basically choose to do it. And the reality of life is, guys, most people don't make the changes in their life unless they have to make them. And usually that's why I say that most people rush. They rush when they have to, when they or they ask for advice when they're in a rush. You know, you will go and speak to your friends and ask for their people's advice and speak to your neighbors. What should I do with my relationship? It's not going right. You will speak to your boss. You know, I'm having problems with my missus, because you will speak to loads of people and get loads of advice when it's, you know, now it's imminent. You're going to break up. And I would just, as we're talking man to man here, I want to encourage you to get into the habit of getting advice before things get really bad. For example, if you clearly know that your relationship is really important, mate, how many books have you read on marriage or relationships in the last year? See, if you've not read a single book, not even one, that basically means that you're relying on luck. Because you know, you look around at the world around you, how many people around you stay together? Basically, the world is shouting at you and is telling you, not many people stay together. So, if you don't do something differently than what they're doing, guess what? You're going to end up being one of them. Look, the reality is, you may understand that you've got some kind of trauma in your life, or you've got loads of resentment in your life. Look, if you don't go and speak to a counselor, speak to a therapist, speak to a pastor, speak to somebody so that you can start the healing process, I'm telling you, you're going to become a resentful, horrible human being. And it's going to get to the point where you're going to be so cancerous that you're going to alienate people in your life, that you're going to diminish people, make people, belittle people, make people feel like shit, right? Without you even wanting to, because it's so affected you, that trauma and that resentment and that anger and frustration, you know, and you haven't dealt with it because you're like, well, it'll be fine, I'll do it later, I'll do it whenever. You've got to deal with stuff when it comes up. Because when you deal with stuff when it comes up, or even beforehand, all of a sudden you're prepared for when it arrives. In fact, one of the things that I wrote down, but I didn't put in this today, is that when you know that something is coming, it's easier to accept it. Meaning, for example, if I actually got this from people who had like somebody who had like dementia in their family, or somebody had cancer. What I basically learned from these individuals is, when you know that somebody who's close to you has suffered, you know that their death is coming, psychologically you actually begin to prepare for it, right? So when that day comes, even though it's painful, even though it's hurtful, you are a lot better equipped to handle it. When I see people go off the rails and they go crazy and they try to commit suicide, is when they think they will never get fired from their job, and then they get fired. They've started a business and their business is never going to fail, then the business fails because of a crash. They think their love is going to last forever, their person is never going to leave them, their person leaves them out of nowhere, or the person dies out of nowhere. And it's like, what the fuck has just happened? This doesn't mean that you have to accept that you're going to break up, that people are going to die. It just means you have to be aware. Let me put this in a way that I heard a man say it. His name was Dr. Miles Monroe. Dr. Miles Monroe said that you always want to be, how did he put it? He said you always want to prepare for the best, but be prepared also for the worst, or something like that. You can Google the phrase, but it's something on those lines. essentially paraphrasing is you've always got to be hopeful. You've always got to do the best. Of course, your relationship's going to work out and you're going to be together forever. Absolutely. But also, you've got to understand that it might not work out. People change. We know this. Like, you know, you've changed, right? You're not who you are today, who you were like 5 years ago. You've completely changed. You think about things differently, right? That doesn't mean that you've got to be a downer and you've got to be depressing. It just means you've always got to be thinking about this kind of stuff. You've always got to ask for advice. That's why I say to people, really read any area that you think is important to you, read about it. Because it will give you loads of people's perspectives on it. If you think that your relationship's really important, go and speak to loads of people in relationships. If you think that this person is the one, go and speak to loads of people who believe that this was the one for them. See what they say. It'll be really interesting for you to get that advice. Unfortunately, we've actually come up to 1 hour. As I said to you, I was going to talk to you about loads of things, and I haven't managed to get to the last point which I wanted to talk to you about, which is around that phrase that I've read so much in books, which is it was a very humbling experience. I'll talk about that another time. But I hope that something that I shared with you today was useful. I hope something that I shared with you today kind of clicks, or I don't know, in some way points you in the right direction. It might not have. I don't know. I'm just doing my best. This is what I feel I should be doing. This is what I feel I should be sharing with you. Yeah. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like this if you obviously found it useful. Don't forget to jump on my YouTube channel, Cassimotive. Subscribe to it, please, so you can support me. And I will see you in next week's episode of Man to Man. Thanks very much. Bye for now.